On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 10.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for radical change in Westminster after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations. It comes just a day after Tory MP Neil Parish announced his resignation after being seen watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. Former Tory MP Anna Soubry told Times Radio her old party has questions to answer.
There is a problem in the Tory party, and the party's aware of it, and it should have dealt with it a long time ago, and it is directly responsible for it.
Russia's defence ministry claims 46 civilians have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, the final part of the port city still controlled by Ukrainian troops. They're the first group to leave since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the industrial area be sealed off last week. Well, US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today and said the US will continue to support Ukraine.
We believe that we are visiting you to say thank you for your fight for freedom, that we are on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
A 38-year-old man has been charged with the murder of 66-year-old Timothy Dundon, whose body was found in Neath near Swansea on Wednesday. Emmett Morrison has been remanded in custody and is due in court tomorrow. Oil and gas companies based in the North Sea face government pressure to invest profits in accelerating domestic energy production. It comes as millions of people continue to face soaring bill costs, and Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has also ordered firms to outline proposals for investments in clean energy. Irish boxer Katie Taylor has beaten Amanda Serrano in the biggest ever fight in women's boxing history. Taylor becomes the undisputed lightweight champion with a split decision points win at Madison Square Gardens in New York. It was the first time two women had headlined the world-famous venue. Prince Charles has urged the public to protect ancient trees in honour of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. A new network of 70 ancient woodlands and trees will mark Her Majesty's 70-year reign. The Prince of Wales says it's the public's responsibility to protect woodland for generations to come. And the makers of long-running soap Neighbours have confirmed two famous faces are returning for the show's finale. Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan will reprise their roles as Scott and Charlene. Show bosses said they were the ultimate Neighbours couple, and a finale wouldn't feel right without them. Now, time for today's weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
This morning, it's going to be a wet morning across central and western parts of England and Wales as a swathe of rain pushes southeastwards. Elsewhere, it's looking drier but mostly cloudy. Starting off in Scotland this lunchtime, and here it will be mostly dry with only the odd shower perhaps. Sunshine will be quite limited, but it should feel markedly warmer than yesterday. Northern Ireland is looking less wet than yesterday too, but cloudy and still some outbreaks of rain here. It should be mostly dry for northeast England. However, as we head southwards, you can see that whilst eastern parts will be largely dry, in the west and across Wales, it's a wet picture with some heavy rain, especially across the Welsh mountains. Because of the rain, it's going to feel much cooler than yesterday. The rain will spread across much of England this afternoon, drier further north, but some showers.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
The Sunday Night Club is your club. I'll take you inside the dressing room, from the terraces to the boardroom, to ask the questions you want answered. There is no membership required for the Sunday Night Club from 7.
Welcome and a very, very good morning. It's Sunday the 1st of May and this is my first show, Tice Talk, live on the new TV channel, the latest TV channel. It is, of course, Talk TV. It's fantastic to be with you this morning. I have to say, looking out of Talk TV towers. It's a bit dull outside, but I have to say, in the last week, there has been nothing dull about what's going on in the news, in politics, in current affairs. It has been a massive, massive week for everybody involved in Westminster, and of course a huge week which we'll be talking about later on with regard to international affairs, Ukraine, more threats coming from Russia, potential nuclear threats. We're going to be talking about that. I'm also going to be talking about on my show today about an international healthcare index that has been produced which shows the UK in the last 20 years remarkably and sadly poor healthcare outcomes. We're going to be talking about Brexit, yes, because what's going on with border checks, with imports, exports, we need an update on that, of course. And then I want to talk about furlough and the bounce-back loans, because it seems that the Chancellor's anti-fraud department, for all of those woeful people who've fraudulently taken furlough money or bounce-back loans, the fraud department is staffed by non-experts, juniors. We need to look at that and why they're not able to recover our money. And of course I want to talk about the latest news regarding the Rwanda policy, the illegal migrants that may or may not be coming across the channel, and indeed the first legal challenges, surprise, surprise, have already started. We'll be catching on that with some amazing guests throughout the show. We've got MPs, experts, doctors, and my big question to you this morning, given everything that we've heard, should it be easier for constituents to be able to recall MPs whose behaviour has fallen short of the standards that we reasonably expect? And have indeed MPs become less popular than estate agents? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your views, your thoughts, or text us 87222 using the word talk, or tweet at Talk TV, because it's your input, your thoughts, your views that make this as an engaging, interactive show. There's so many different ways to watch us, apart from YouTube, the app, of course. There's also now Sky, Virgin Media, Freeview, FreeSat, all these different ways to get involved and to have your say. You are listening here to Tice Talk on Talk TV. Yes, indeed, that wonderful little piece of music confirms that it is time for my Sunday sermon every Sunday. Now, to my listeners, some might call it my flock, supporters, detractors, haters, my Sunday show is, of course, the time for you to get involved, to repent and release your anxieties, your frustrations. I may not be able to cure them, but I'll certainly help you release them. And I want to make a special mention at the beginning of my Sunday sermon to Catherine from North East London, who I met the other day on the doorstep, and she listens every morning to this Sunday sermon, so at least I've got one listener out there in North London. A very good morning to you, Catherine. Now, don't forget, give us a call about the big issue of the day, the week. And I want to talk about this week on this Sunday sermon, about standards in Westminster and standards in public life. Because surely MPs, it's one of the most important jobs in the United Kingdom. It's a job that we all want to trust, we want to respect them, we want to admire them and to look up to them. And I think that's how it used to be. But I really am very concerned that something has gone badly, badly wrong. We've got a situation where even the two leaders of the main two parties are now both accused of misleading and lying about COVID party breaches, about lockdowns, who attended, what gathering, what drink was drunk. You know, that's just the beginning. But the far more serious issue regards individual MPs and their behaviour. And I just want to go through a few of them to remind us where, I'm afraid to say, we're at. We've got one Tory MP that is suspended from the parliamentary party for 3 allegations of sexual harassment, an allegation of cocaine drug abuse, for borrowing £100,000 from a Russian businessman, and he didn't declare his interest on this. And this businessman had been barred from the Financial Conduct Authorities being a fit and proper person, and yet this MP didn't declare it to the authorities. So having been suspended, having had his whip withdrawn, he still hasn't resigned, and there's nothing his constituents can do. We've got a Labour MP that was convicted last October of harassment of another woman, including threatening acid. The judge described an MP no less, as untruthful, and that her defence was vague, incoherent and illogical. We're talking about an elected MP described as untruthful by a judge. She was sentenced to 10 weeks imprisonment. The whip was withdrawn. She's been expelled from the Labour Party, who asked her to resign as an MP. Now, in fairness to her, she has appealed, and that appeal won't be heard, I think, until May or June. But once again, there's nothing constituents can do. And to complete another list of a different party, we've got an SNP elected MP, who in the middle, the height of the COVID crisis, knowing that she was ill and had COVID, she travelled up and down from Scotland to London with COVID. She was suspended by her party. Nicola Sturgeon asked her to resign, but she refuses, despite being arrested, and has been charged with culpable and reckless conduct. And the case is not being heard until, wait for it, August. How does it take so long? August. Her own constituency association have asked her to resign, but she refuses. Maybe it's because she knows she's unemployable by anybody else, and yet there's nothing constituents can do. Back to the Tory party, where there's another Tory MP who's also suspended from the parliamentary party after an inquiry in May 2021 by the Parliament's Complaints and Standards Committee. And he was suspended for 6 weeks from Parliament for sexual misconduct breaches. Lost the whip, expelled from the party, multiple calls from other MPs to resign, to do the right thing, and yet there he is, still sitting there as an independent MP. And unbelievably, the Tory party, having expelled him from the party, they've readmitted him as a member in October last year. And there's nothing the constituents can do. And in all of these situations, the voters have no right of recall, despite it being absolutely clear that their elected MP has displayed and conducted themselves with behaviour that's either illegal or well below the standards that I think we reasonably expect of such an important job. And let me tell you, I come from the world of business. In the corporate world, every single one of those individuals would have been fired straight out the door, probably with zero compensation. No ifs, no buts. And yet in probably the most important building in the land, the Houses of Parliament, these people are still there. Something is badly wrong. Now, what if you think of Neil Parish MP? At least he has actually done the decent thing and realised his time was up. He'd made a catastrophic mistake and mistakes, and he has actually resigned. Imran Ahmed Khan, having been convicted of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy back in 2008, he has finally, weeks after he said he was going to, finally he has resigned. But yet we've got another 50 MPs facing sexual harassment and misconduct charges. I mean, what is going on? It's unbelievable. It's quite clear that far too many in Westminster think that somehow, having been elected, they're above the law. Rules don't apply to them. And that far too often, integrity, principles, moral decency has gone out the window, vanished, up in smoke. It's truly, truly depressing, and we voters deserve better. Out of this shambles, in my view, we need a new process of recall, not one that's vexatious, but here's my suggestion. What about an independent parliamentary panel that can determine, that can assess if the behaviour of an MP is such that actually constituents of that MP deserve the right to recall that MP in the constituency. So at least there is a reasonable right of expectation of recall if behaviour falls below the standards that we expect. I really do believe, that voters, constituents, all of us, we need better. We deserve better. This is supposed to be the mother of all democracies. So I say, in order to ensure better standards, more integrity, we need to change the recall process, because something has gone badly, badly wrong in Westminster. Here endeth my Sunday sermon. There we are, 0344 499 1000 is the number with your views. Am I being too harsh on MPs? Maybe they're all just fallible and human. Maybe we shouldn't be worrying about all this stuff. I want to hear from you, either by phone or by tweet at Talk TV. Coming up, we're going to be talking to the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight and also a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee about Ukraine and about Putin. Yes, Bob Seeley. Don't miss it. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV this Sunday morning, the 1st of May, and the switchboard has lit up and the tweets are coming in. Tweet us at Talk TV with your views. One here from Vinny, who says, spot on, Richard, regarding the private sector dealing with this type of behaviour. Our government's in the gutter and it'll only get worse. It's time for reform. There we are. Well, we need to talk about a absolutely vital issue that should concern all of us. But I was gobsmacked that in the Mail on Sunday today, the subject of Ukraine and Russia and Putin's behaviour doesn't appear until page 20. Quite extraordinary, really, given what's happened this week, the additional threats coming from Putin and his foreign minister. We must not forget about this crucial, vital story that is affecting us all. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight and a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Bob Seeley. Bob, a very good morning to you. Welcome to Talk TV, the new channel. Is this your first appearance on us?
I think so, Richard, but I've had the privilege of talking to you either on the radio or in person on quite a few occasions before, so it's always good. I hope you're having a good morning, and hello to your viewers.
Thank you. And I just said there, I mean, in a sense, the war is dragging on. We're into a long war of attrition, but actually, I've got real anxiety, Bob, that, in a sense, we're entering an ever more dangerous phase because, you know, the bravery of the Ukrainians, supported by weapons and ammunition and equipment from the UK and the US and others, means that, in a sense, we're now into a sort of a long, grinding war of attrition. But my concern, Bob, is that, in a sense, Ukraine, as a proxy for the West, can't be seen to lose. And, of course, Putin can't be seen to lose. And the implications of that, I think, are getting worse rather than better.
I think you sum it up really well. And there is a path to a relatively peaceful outcome, but there are also lots of paths to very bad outcomes. And that worries me as well. And you're also right to say that actually we are beginning to normalise and just take for granted what is probably the most dangerous situation in the 1980s and potentially since the Cuban Missile Crisis as well. If the Russians win, then clearly they will, or seize, as they have done thus far, seize more of the southern belt of Ukraine, then they will be able to declare a victory. They may then try to do the same in northern Kazakhstan, in the Baltic states, which are NATO countries, and elsewhere, and simply take an intimidating and destructive position regarding the affairs of the world for many years to come. If Russia loses, and its a land corridor to the Crimea is under threat, it's the land it seized in 2014 in eastern Ukraine is under threat, or if Crimea is under threat, then Putin is going to have some decision points whether he decides to either go for mass mobilization or potentially the use of tactical nuclear weapons. So I would not normalize this situation. It remains incredibly dangerous. I also understand why people are getting fed up with it, because it's 60 days of war, and it's 60 days of reading some terrible, terrible stories about people killing each other in horrendous circumstances. So I
guess my sort of anxiety about this is that within that normalisation, it may be that if Putin can't win by sort of ground troops and ground forces alone, and it looks that that's less likely than more likely, that actually he just ramps up the shelling, the bombing, not only in the east, but as we've seen just in the last week, elsewhere in Ukraine, in Kyiv again, and in the west, and that essentially he just gradually grinds down and just sort of bombs towns and cities, a bit like Mariupol, to destruction over months and months and months, because he can't be seen to lose.
Yes, I mean, he'd have to destroy an awful lot of cities, because once you've gone through Kherson, you then have to destroy Mykolaiv, which is a big city. I was there about 2 weeks ago, and Odessa, which is an even bigger city, and I was there at the same time 2 weeks ago as well, talking to them. So, I mean, destroying a city using artillery takes months, not weeks. And Mariupol isn't that big a city, and they've taken a very long time to destroy that. So, you're right. I mean, just grinding attritionally is an option. This is why, for example, the debate over moving Ukraine to NATO specifications, certainly for artillery, is a really important debate. Because if they move to NATO standard 155 millimeter, not 152, so slightly bigger artillery shell, A, they get a lot of supply because we can keep on supplying them ad infinitum, and B, all things considered, 155 gives you a slightly longer range than 152. So the Ukrainians could hit the Russian artillery positions and be slightly out of range from the Russian positions themselves. So that sort of kit, even at a quite basic level, begins to change the dynamics of the war. Excuse me. At the same time, if you then have directed missiles, so more high technology missiles, which are able to pinpoint specific artillery units and sites, then again, that becomes an even more game changer. But again, that pushes the Russians on the back foot, and that gives Putin decision points about what to do.
Exactly. It's these decision points that are obviously of such a concern. I also just want to talk, Bob, about the, in a sense, the pressure that we put on Russia, the sanctions. Obviously, we've seen what's happened to energy prices, and certain countries are more reliant on Russian gas than others. And whilst I think the West is pretty unified in terms of sending weapons to help Ukraine, there's clearly a breaking up of that unity when it comes to buying gas from Russia. Some of the European nations, I think Germany and Austria, now are starting to pay for gas in rubles. And you know, this
it hasn't quite been sorted yet.
But they're trying to, and this clearly is a real concern, because we have to ramp up the sanctions pressure, and if people sort of find ways of breaking that, then clearly that's a lot less effective.
It is, and you're right. And the unity, I mean, the unity isn't quite there on supplying arms. People are making their own decisions, and the unity isn't there on gas, in large part because, I mean, led by the Germans, various countries in Europe have been deeply, deeply irresponsible for the last 10 years. You know, I'm half German. I'm very fond of the Germans, actually. But I have to say, for the first time in my life, I'm actually ashamed by what the Germans have done over the past few years. They've become utterly dependent on Russian gas. And not only that, but they have deluded themselves time and time again, either through corruption or a mis-sentimentalizing of the past, or just a confused diplomatic, confused diplomatic assessments that somehow becoming absolutely dependent on Russian energy brings them closer to Russia. It doesn't. It just gives the Russians more power. And I think it has been a deliberate policy of Putin to restrict the supply of gas, put up the price so he makes more money out of it, and at the same time make European countries more dependent. So what those countries have done has been deeply, deeply foolish.
Oh, it has. I mean, unbelievably naive, but essentially we are where we are. They're now so dependent.
On that point, it is, whilst it is true to say that, it is also true to say that we have been very naive ourselves. I am so happy that Boris has done the right thing, and thanks to Ben Wallace he has. But let's remember that, sadly, Boris, and indeed, you know, our political classes, did not see a problem with, you know, the amount of Russian wealth flowing through London. And you know, we've made foolish assessments ourselves. We changed over time.
We've all been incredibly naive leaders of Western nations, as has clearly been demonstrated. But my concern also, in a sense, of course, we all want the war to end as soon as possible. Yeah. But equally, assuming Putin is still in charge, because that's a matter for the Russian people.
Yeah.
What happens to the sanctions? Just briefly before we finish.
I think the sanctions stay on for a long time, and eventually you're going to see some fraying of the edges, either because this war simply becomes an attritional war and there doesn't seem to be much movement. We know there will be, so I'm not sure how much I believe that course of action, or there will be some kind of resolution with Putin still in charge, in which case some of the sanctions, some of the directed sanctions will stay, but other sanctions will come off. You can see it coming off arts people. You can see it coming off maybe free movement of travel. We should encourage Russian.
Bob, thank you so much indeed for that. I've got to go to the news, but that was Bob Seeley, the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight. I think the sanctions should remain in place as long as Putin is in charge. Anyway, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're going to the news, and then I'll be taking your calls and tweets. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk TV.
My friends had to describe me, I don't know, maybe you should ask them. But I think, or I hope they would say, I am the life and the soul of the party. I'll arrive, things get going, things get done. I'm a doer. They'd say that They'd also say I'm glass half full. I look for the positive things in people's lives, in what's going on. But also, I think they'd say I'm passionate. I'm passionate about what I do, what I support, what I believe in.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for a radical change in Westminster after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations. It comes just a day after Tory MP Neil Parish announced his resignation after being seen watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. Former Tory MP Anna Soubry told Times Radio her old party has questions to answer.
There is a problem in the Tory party, and the party's aware of it, and it should have dealt with it a long time ago, and it is directly responsible for it.
Russia's defence ministry claims 46 civilians have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, the final part of the port city still controlled by Ukrainian troops. They're the first group to leave since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the industrial area to be sealed off last week. It's thought around 1,000 people are still trapped inside the estate and 100,000 civilians remain in the city. Well, US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today and said the US will continue to support Ukraine. Irish boxer Katie Taylor has beaten Amanda Serrano in the biggest ever fight in women's boxing history. Taylor retained her lightweight world titles to become the undisputed champion with a split decision points win at Madison Square Gardens in New York. It's the first time two women had headlined the world-famous venue. And the makers of long-running soap Neighbours have confirmed two famous faces are returning for the show's finale. Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan will reprise their roles as Scott and Charlene. Show bosses said they were the ultimate Neighbours couple and a finale wouldn't feel right without them. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. Well, the switchboard has lit up, but before we go to the calls, coming up later in this hour, we're going to be talking to Tim Knox, who's the author of a study about the poor results of the UK in a international healthcare outcomes index. I think it's really important. We're pouring money into the NHS, but maybe we're not getting the outcomes. Just looking at some tweets that have come in here. One says, I think this is an interesting idea. Each constituency should have a panel to decide the future of an MP. A body within Parliament won't work. So this is from Brian, who doesn't agree with me. He thinks that the panel would stick up for each other if it was based in Parliament. Interesting thought from Brian. Yes, Michael reminded me about Barry Gardner, who received £500,000 in donations from what turned out to be a Chinese spy. Someone else here... who's that? The Dan from Devon says, Richard, I noticed you'd never mentioned Keir Starmer's beer drinking. Well, actually, I did. That was right at the beginning of my sermon. And in a way, I didn't want to individualise it. I didn't name any of the MPs. I just wanted to focus on the principle, the integrity of the issue. But anyway, let's go to our first caller, who is Sharon. Sharon is in Tamworth. Morning, Sharon.
Good morning, Richard.
How are you doing? What are your thoughts this morning?
Right, I'm fine, thank you. I'd like to say I think your summary, Sunday morning sermon, was brilliant. It was a perfect summary of what's going on.
Thank you, thank you.
You've only got to watch Prime Minister's Question Time and see the behaviour, the heckling and jeering. And as for all the other behaviours that you mentioned, it shows that there's no morality, it's gone.
And it's so sad, isn't it? Because, you know, I remember growing up and an MP is like the pinnacle of society. You know, it's up there with whether you're... it's higher than being an engineer or a surgeon or a GP. You know, these were sort of the pillars of society that you aspire to.
Yes, that's correct. They're not setting an example to young people neither.
And it's, you know, it's so sad and it's so important. And I think we want them to do well.
Yeah.
We want them to run the country better.
Yeah.
And it demeans them, you know, when they think that they can get away with this stuff.
Well, this is it. It doesn't set an example to other people. There's just no morality. And I think what you said, your summary of it all, was absolutely perfect. I can't understand anybody that wouldn't agree with it, to be honest with you.
Yes, and, I mean, there was an interesting tweet that came in about a different way of looking at the recall process.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know, I want to encourage more engagement between voters and their elected representatives, the MPs, but they've got to trust them. And
yes.
it's, you know, it's a two-way street, actually. And if the MPs let constituents down, then I think we've got to think again.
Of course, yes.
And, you know, it's just not good enough. Well, look, Sharon, just whilst you're on, just turning a mind to, obviously, the cost of living crisis.
Yes.
How is that hitting you? Are you doing anything particularly? Have you changed your spending patterns?
Well, I just think it's disgusting, this government, how it's handling the cost of living crisis, because they're spending all this money here, there and everywhere on the war and everything, which I know this isn't Ukraine's fault. I'm not against Ukraine at all. But I feel that all the money that they're spending is just ridiculous, and they're not looking at what's going on around them. They're just not in reality.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sharon. Is there one thing, Sharon, you'd like them to do to help the cost of living crisis? One thing, quickly.
Well, yes, to sort out the bills, to help with the energy bills.
The energy bills. OK, Sharon, that's
food,
brilliant.
yeah.
I think you're spot on. I've been raising my concerns about the rising energy bills. My concern is we're literally at the foothills of the cost mountain of the energy bills. They could be far, far worse, but maybe Richard in Manchester has got a different view. Richard, good morning. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Richard. Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. Well, with regards to the bills going up, it affects everybody. I've had to cancel my medical health because they put it up by, £2,000. And I thought, oh, well, we'll cancel the whole lot. I'll go to the NHS, which I do normally, and don't use the private health a lot. But I thought, no, that's it. I've finished with it. And I've got a good hospital near me. I'm suffering at the moment, so I have to go quite regularly. But at the end of the day, they're looking after me, and I can't ask for anything else. And that contribution will help me with my bills, being an old man.
Sure. And it's good to hear some, you know, positive stories about the NHS, and there are lots of them. But in a sense, I want us to be just better and better, and I want us to have the best healthcare system in the world. And I'm going to be talking about that later this hour.
Sure, Richard. You're a man of great principles, and I've known you, not known you personally, but going to your various rallies for Brexit and now the Reform Party, and I'm looking forward to better things.
Well,
this thing that's happening in the House is terrible, and it's been going down and down and down since the SNP came down to London. And all they do now is the SNP. It's very, very plain to see. The Labour, the Libs, and everybody else are all queuing up to get Boris out, and that is not the whole purpose of the House of Commons. And now I think they're going to sit up a little bit. Now we've got this borders law. And I do hope that the do-gooders, these wonderful people who have been making millions and millions and millions out of the law system as it was, and the human rights law, they've abused it terribly.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody knows, Richard.
Well,
it's time now, and I'm very, very grateful for somebody like Priti Patel. Nobody seems to like her, but I tell you what, she's taken the bull by the horns on this one, Richard.
There's no question she's trying, and in my third hour, Richard, listen up, because we're going to be talking about the first legal challenges, which the government knew would come for this Rwanda policy, and the first legal challenges have indeed started. So, Richard, stay with us and listen up to that. Thank you very much. Yeah, last thing, Richard.
I will, definitely, yeah. It's a great Sunday morning, and the sermon was good today, like the last caller said. And if you just one thing extra, Richard, if I may, you've got the BBC and the mainstream media and everybody. I've not heard one word about 9 or 10 days of no illegal immigrants coming over on the boats. Not one word from them. None of them. I've scoured the papers.
That's right. Well, there's a reason for that, which I'll be talking about in the third hour. That's Richard in Manchester with his concerns about a variety of things. The tweets are coming in. One here from Stephen who says, this is interesting. Stephen says, trust is a two-way thing, Richard. You're right. So why wouldn't you back a rule by referendum manifesto? You don't trust the people enough, I guess. I think what he's probably referring to is having more referendums about more important issues. And actually, I'm a great fan of referendums, surprise, surprise. I rather like the way the Swiss do it. Any big issue, not just a constitutional issue, but any big issue, actually, the people get a say. I think if about 100,000 or 500,000 people in Switzerland call for a referendum, then actually they can get a referendum and a proper national debate. That's how you trust the people. I rather like that. But anyway, give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your views and your thoughts. Coming up, we're going to be talking about this new report by Tim Knox, and I've got Tim Knox himself to talk to us, showing where the UK's healthcare system and outcomes over the last 20 years, where they sit relative to other nations. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It is, of course, Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is, of course, Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios here in central London. Now, we've been talking about Ukraine, we've been talking about standards in public life. But actually, what's probably most important to all of us is our health. And, you know, we want the NHS to be fantastic, to be the best outcomes in the world. Why not? You know, after all, we've got such pride in it. We clapped, and you know, we're so grateful to our doctors and surgeons and nurses. And yet, I have to tell you, with some sadness in a way, that there's a new international healthcare outcomes report that's just been produced this week, a major new comparison of global health systems. And it looked at 19 different countries and their healthcare systems and looked at outcomes over the last 20 plus years. And regrettably, the UK comes second to bottom. I repeat, second to bottom across a major series of issues such as life expectancy and survival rates from cancer, from strokes and from heart attacks. And really and truly, given that we're spending about the average spend per head for those 19 countries, my view is that's just not good enough. It really isn't good enough. We've got to aspire for better. And I'm delighted now to be joined by the author of this report for Civitas, Tim Knox. Tim, a very good morning. Thanks for joining Tice Talk on Talk TV. So this is a really significant report that you've produced. Is this the first one, or is it a sort of a follow-on to previous reports?
It's the first one that we have done, but it does exactly copy the methodology in the countries covered and the diseases covered by a report co-published a few years ago by the leading think tanks in the health field and the Institute for Physical Studies. So it's got an unimpeachable methodology, I hope. Which
is fantastic. My slight sadness, Tim, is that it hasn't had what should have been, frankly, the front page coverage, because there's just so much other noise going on in the media for, in a sense, much less important things. But do sort of, please give the summary of the key findings for my listeners and viewers.
Thank you. The key findings are all pretty grim, I'm afraid. As you say, it's not a question of spending. We do spend exactly the average of the other countries studied, who are all the well-off countries who it is fair to compare the UK with. It's not about the money. Interestingly, it's not about our lifestyles either, as some people try to claim. Yes, we don't have great records on smoking and drinking and eat our diet, but actually we're pretty average in comparison to the other countries. And again, other people claim that for things like cancer, well, it's how much we smoke and so on. But that actually overlooks the fact that the data that I report are looking at long-term survival rates. In other words, if you have cancer, how likely are you to live for an extra 5 years? In Japan, where they do smoke much more than we do, their survival rate for lung cancer for 5 years is 60% of the population. For us, it's just 21%.
Wow.
It's staggering how much better things can be done in other countries. And it's not about the money, and it's certainly not about looking at America. As you said, we are one from bottom. The bottom country, I stress, the bottom country is America. They spend ludicrous amounts of money on health, 60% more than we do. Yet they have an extraordinarily low life expectancy, and their survival rate for killer diseases is pretty low. Unless you're staggeringly rich in America, you get a bad deal. So we want to completely get rid of the canard that by criticizing the NHS system, we are somehow advocating an American system. That's completely untrue.
I mean, and it seems to me, of course, you mentioned lung cancer, but it's not just lung cancer. Colon, breast cancer, stomach cancer, all of these different cancers, regrettably, we are right down near the bottom, aren't we?
Right down near the bottom, as we are for strokes, as we are for heart attacks, as we are for respiratory diseases. It's very bad news, and it's time we woke up, because It's not possible to change something which has, understandably, for which we all have, very understandably, great affection, great loyalty, and it blinds us to the fact that we are doing quite so badly. So we really do need to start questioning whether we are getting the outcomes that we deserve.
And Tim, isn't it, I find it extraordinary that even life expectancy, we're down at 17th out of 19. And I guess that's partly because we're not very good at some of these other issues you've just mentioned. But life expectancy, I mean, we should be right up there in the top, in the Premier League, surely.
One would hope so. But, obviously, it's very important to stress that life expectancy is partly influenced by things like diet. And it's no surprise, again, that Japan is the #1 country because they do have a relatively good diet. But it's not our diet that's the problem. It's not our smoking rates that are the problem. It's not our drinking that's the problem, because actually, and it's not the fact that we're an ageing population. That is true across all countries.
Sure. And then even
is our health system.
And even, for example, in the maternity, birth rate, survival rates of babies born within, the number that sadly die within 30 days, absolutely tragic. Again, we're 15th out of 18.
Exactly. It's the same across all these measures. And the most terrifying one of all is something rather euphemistically called treatable mortality. That's the proportion of patients who die because they did not receive the medical treatment that they needed. That is a direct measure of how well a system is working. And there, we're one from bottom again. The one country, of course, below us is America. And if we were just reaching the average of the comparator countries, not the top, just hoping to be average, we would save over 6,500 lives a year.
Wow.
Put that in perspective, over 20 years, that's the number of people who died in the first wave of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean...
We are doing really badly.
Tim, I think it's such a valuable contribution to the debate because, yes, the NHS is probably the most loved healthcare system in the world, but as I've said before, we have to face up to the fact, and I think you provide concrete, comparable proof that it is not the best managed healthcare system in the world, and therefore the outcomes are way near the bottom.
Absolutely. And in a very strange way, it does go back to the very beginnings of the NHS. And when it was founded in the immediate aftermath of the destruction of the Second World War, it was an extraordinary achievement. One of the first health systems in the world to provide universal, free at the point of use care. It was no wonder that it was called the envy of the world. But that was 75 years ago. Since then, all the other well-off countries in the world have developed their own systems, very different to ours, and they have all overtaken us rapidly. And we are now lagging behind.
That's right. Tim, thank you so much. Well, I hope that you're able to continue to make these measurements because it's so important in order to inform policymakers, decision-makers, politicians that actually reform is needed. It's absolutely fundamental. It's not just about money. That's Tim Knox, who was the author of this really important International Healthcare Outcomes Index 2022. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, if you've got views or thoughts on that discussion, that debate. We're going to go to Kim, who's in Kent. Morning, Kim.
Hello, Richard. How are you? I'm
good, thank you, although sort of slightly shocked by that report on the International Healthcare Outcomes, but it's a really important contribution to the debate. But what's on your mind this morning, Kim?
Well, it's the usual. As you probably know, I've spoken to you before. I live at... And we've now got more boats on their way across the channel.
Have you got boats this morning, Kim?
2 in already at Dover, and I've just looked at the marine vessel app that I've got. And there's currently a Border Force vessel off of Dungeness. There's another one that's out, obviously spotting.
Yes.
Looking out for more vessels coming in. But the past few days, we've had, quite adverse weather out in the Channel, and it's now calmed down. So the green light has been lit, and they're ready to cross again.
Well,
so much for the Rwanda plan.
Yes, indeed. And if Mike Graham is listening whilst walking his dog, I had a discussion with him when I told him he was wrong on Friday morning. And I think, Kim, you've just proven that actually it was the weather. And although we would like the Rwanda plan to act as a deterrent, I think today is proving, sadly, that it's not a deterrent. It's about the weather and the tides. So Kim, in a sense, if there's good weather over the next couple of days, this is just going to continue.
Well, it usually does when we get, a spot of good weather like this. For a few days, they just come across at a steady pace. And of course, there are the ones that just disappear anyway, and they avoid detection by Border Force, and they land on very, very quiet beaches and then just disappear into the landscape or waiting cars.
Yes,
quite a few of them do, because they've got GPS on their iPhones.
Kim,
they just wait to be picked up.
And Kim, whilst you've been talking, we had a tweet here from Rachel who says, "Hi Richard, give the Rwanda plan a bit more time. I think it's working. We're all fighting for the same thing in the end. That's what Brexit means and all." Well, Rachel, we all want it to work, but I think Kim's call proves that actually it's going to take some time. Do you agree with that, Kim?
Yes, well, we didn't believe it anyway down here because, everybody here is sceptic because we're so used to this happening. And it just won't stop people coming in under the radar. They've been doing that anyway, so they'll just continue to do it. If they can get into the country and then, off with somebody, there's somebody who's been waiting to pick them up and drive them somewhere.
That's right.
They don't have to be seen by anyone.
There's a lot more to be done, that is for sure. The Rwanda plan is not enough. Kim, thank you so much for your thoughts there. Stay with us. Coming up in the second hour, we're going to be talking to Richard Ballantyne about the Brexit checks. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk TV.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 11.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. The Business Secretary has told Times Radio that Boris Johnson will remain as leader despite any local election results. Voters will head to the polls on Friday, but Kwasi Kwarteng gave the PM his full backing and said he was safe in his job. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for radical change in Westminster after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations. It comes just a day after Tory MP Neil Parish announced his resignation after being seen watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. Former Tory MP Anna Soubry told Times Radio her old party has questions to answer.
There is a problem in the Tory party, and the party's aware of it, and it should have dealt with it a long time ago, and it is directly responsible for it.
Russia's defence ministry claims 46 civilians have left the Azov-style steelworks in Mariupol, the final part of the port city still controlled by Ukrainian troops. They're the first group to leave since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the industrial area be sealed off last week. Well, US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today and said the US will continue to support Ukraine.
We believe that we are visiting you to say thank you for your fight for freedom, that we are on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
A 38-year-old man has been charged with the murder of 66-year-old Timothy Dundon, whose body was found in Neath near Swansea on Wednesday. Emmett Morrison has been remanded in custody and is due in court tomorrow. Irish boxer Katie Taylor has beaten Amanda Serrano in the biggest ever fight in women's boxing history. Taylor retained her lightweight world titles to become the undisputed champion with a split decision points win at Madison Square Gardens in New York. It was the first time two women had headlined the world-famous venue. Prince Charles has urged the public to protect ancient trees in honour of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. A new network of 70 ancient woodlands and trees will mark Her Majesty's 70-year reign. The Prince of Wales says it's the public's responsibility to protect woodland for generations to come. And the makers of long-running soap Neighbours have confirmed two famous faces are returning for the show's finale. Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan will reprise their roles as Scott and Charlene. Show bosses said they were the ultimate Neighbours couple and a finale wouldn't feel right without them. Now time for today's weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV Weather.
This morning, it's going to be a wet morning across central and western parts of England and Wales as a swathe of rain pushes southeastwards. Elsewhere, it's looking drier but mostly cloudy. Starting off in Scotland this lunchtime, and here it will be mostly dry with only the odd shower perhaps. Sunshine will be quite limited, but it should feel markedly warmer than yesterday. Northern Ireland is looking less wet than yesterday too, but cloudy and still some outbreaks of rain here. It should be mostly dry for northeast England. However, as we head southwards, you can see that whilst eastern parts will be largely dry, in the west and across Wales, it's a wet picture with some heavy rain, especially across the Welsh mountains. Because of the rain, it's going to feel much cooler than yesterday. The rain will spread across much of England this afternoon, drier further north, but some showers.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV Weather.
The Sunday Night Club is your club. I'll take you inside the dressing room, from the terraces to the boardroom, to ask the questions you want answered. There is no membership required for the Sunday Night Club from 7.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, live from the updated, the new colourful Talk Radio studios, which are fantastic. Now, it's a big week ahead. We're into the second hour of the programme, but looking forward to the week ahead. We've got the polls later this week. The results will be announced, of course, on Friday for the council elections from the voting that takes place up and down the country on Thursday. Now, in this second hour, we're going to be talking also about the radicalisation that's going on in UK prisons, and a report that's come out there. We'll be talking to Dr. Rakib Hassan on that. And then later in the hour, we're also going to be looking at what's going on in the anti-fraud unit, a really important department within the Treasury under Rishi Sunak. Why is it staffed with lots of juniors? That's a big concern to me. But we also need to talk about Brexit, of course, because that's such a great opportunity for our country and how that's going. And I'm delighted that we're now going to be joined by my next guest to look at the question of the checks going on trade, on goods coming across the borders, but also the quantity of import and export since the essentially since we left the European Union. And Richard Ballantyne is the Chief Executive of the British Ports Association, and he is hopefully dialing in to us. Whilst we're waiting for him, I'm just going to look at this tweet following our healthcare discussion, which has just come in from Mr. Woodward. This is actually a great one. I love this. Isn't it time to call on Elon Musk to come in and save the NHS with one remit to ensure that it remains taxpayer-funded at the point of use? Well, in a sense, it is going to remain taxpayer-funded at the point of use. But actually what I'd really like Elon Musk to do is to focus on delivering better outcomes. Surely that's what all of us want, shorter waiting lists. So that's what I'd like Mr. Musk to do. Meanwhile, Sir St. Gerard, he says, the NHS is too focused on regulation and compliance. Its priority is to manage itself and not the outcome for patients. That's a really interesting thought process. It's the same in all the public services. Too many middle managers managing compliance and not enough people looking after the patients, delivering the outcomes. Lower waiting lists, better performance, better outcomes, faster delivery, whether it's the DVLA, whether it's Passport Office, whether it's NHS waiting lists. That, for me, is absolutely crucial. If we're going to pay higher taxes, which we'd all rather not pay, then for heaven's sake, let's get the best outcomes, the best performance. Now, we're still waiting for Richard Ballantyne to join us, so we're going to go to a caller in Welwyn Garden City, where Teresa is waiting patiently. Morning, Teresa.
Morning.
Hi there. Hi, what's on your mind this morning?
It is I was just listening as I'm kind of doing my breakfast kind of thing, to what you were just saying about the NHS, and I'm stood there almost going, oh my God, that is so true. You know, it's just, I've recently had quite a few problems that have gone on for a few years. I'm of the age of menopause, which is horrendous in itself. But it started off where, for me, I've gone in there with like back pains, or what I thought were like back pains kind of thing. And I've had a 3.5, 4 year long battle with my GP, with my doctor's surgery, as to trying to get diagnosed. And they've diagnosed me with so many different things, to the point of I've gone to them sort of like last year and tried to launch a complaint. And how's that gone? Has that been properly dealt with? It's horrendous, because, I mean, it kind of struck home when we had all these deaths of these, you know, babies, and it was all investigated. And again, along with myself and with friends of similar ages and possibly older, we're all saying just to try and get a GP's appointment is impossible, and they make it impossible for you to complain. It's done through the Ombudsman, and to try and get the facts that you need to put in a complaint, they make it so that you have to keep going back to your GP to try and resolve the issue. So it's just
unnecessary bureaucracy?
Massively.
And you mentioned, Teresa, about HRT, and there was and I know this has been an issue that, again, has been raised this week, and concerns about a shortage of hormone replacement therapies. And yet there's an article in the Mail on Sunday suggesting that actually there's an alternative called, I think it's Bijuve or Bijuve, which, and yet they're unable to get that properly approved up and down the country.
Yeah. There is, but it's not just that. It is the fact that they tell you to go to your GP. They tell you, I'm on every single forum there is going, and they tell you to go to your GP, but your GPs aren't. They don't want to deal with it. Like I say, they've misdiagnosed me as having sciatica, fibromyalgia. By diagnosing women with fibromyalgia, they then have everything that is connecting to menopause, connects to fibromyalgia, so you start to believe it. But I just think it's not so much the fact that they're a problem sourcing it. It is the fact that women are screaming about it right now. And like they say, if you then look at the figures have gone up from, a few, thousand to absolutely thousands of them screaming for menopausal treatments. And like I say, I've had 3.5 years on the wrong treatments and trying to get the treatments. You have to have an argument and a fight and put in a complaint. And what it is like in the last few months since after Christmas, they've now put me on this gel that everybody is screaming for, that they're all buying on the black market. But it's not because of, shortages. It is because your doctors don't listen to you. And even now, I'm still fighting with my doctor.
Well, Teresa, keep battling, keep fighting. I hope it does get easier for you. Thank you so much for sharing that with my listeners and viewers. That was Teresa in Welwyn Garden City, bravely telling about her challenges of trying to get the right treatment. We want it to be the best. We want it to be brilliant, but there's so much to do. Anyway, we have now, thanks for that call from Teresa, we have now got Richard Ballantyne, Chief Executive of the British Ports Association, on the line, because there's an announcement this week that the new checks on food imports that were due to be started later this year, this summer, has been delayed for the 4th time. Richard, a very good morning to you. We've spoken before. This may be your first appearance on our, as we've become Talk TV. If it is, welcome. Thanks for joining me. So this delay from the government, I mean, in a sense, from my point of view, I want to see less checks. I want to see more technology. In a way, this is good news.
Well, yeah, Richard, I have to say, take my hat off to you, because I think last time we spoke, you said, Richard, don't worry, we'll be fine. There won't be all these onerous checks. Stop panicking, Richard. So fair play, you got it right, Richard. But I mean, on all seriousness, yes, I think you'll find there are people in the logistics industry who really welcome this decision, because I think the government are forecasting it's about $1 billion extra in annual costs for inspections, so paying for veterinary health officers to open containers or lorries and look at things like beef coming from Italy or grain coming from other parts of Europe. And I think originally, when we were sort of negotiating the deal with the EU, industry was feeding in saying, let's have an agreement that has this, so we don't need to have the facilities to do these checks. But, of course, the government decided that it didn't want to do that, didn't want to have bits of the single market applicable to us, and we understand that. And just for the last couple of years, therefore, we've had to build all this infrastructure, which is now probably going to be redundant. So that's why we're slightly unhappy.
Yeah, and, no one wants to waste money. I get that. But just so we're clear, at the moment, on food exports from the UK to the EU, they are doing a certain percentage of checks. But we've essentially chosen now 4 times to delay those. So are we essentially... and I'm going to be an optimist here, we're adopting the moral high ground, saying, look, actually, we trust the quality of the food that you are exporting to us. Why can't you do the same?
So I think that's a fair point, Richard, although you have to bear in mind that the European Union has its rules and its rule books, etc., which, treats goods coming in from Britain the same as it would from other parts of the world. So, we can't really tinker with that, unfortunately, although... there's the new domestic advisory group on the EU-UK deal, where we'll be feeding in suggestions to the European Union that we may have some synergies there. But I think the problem is for them is that they are set by the European rule book. And now, yes, indeed, we can decide what we want to do. And indeed, there will be some in the sector and the biosecurity sector who will suggest that we do need to have some kind of checks. And we'll need to make sure that it's legal in line with sort of trade rules, etc. But yes, you're absolutely right. We do have the ability to decide these things. It's just for us, it would have been more sensible to make those decisions before we started putting spades in the ground and planning applications and funding all these projects.
I mean, in a sense, yes, you've made the investment. It's there to be used if necessary. Equally, I gather there is some more technology coming, potentially sort of the back end of 2023, about a new digital world trade checks that might make it an even lighter touch for everybody, which clearly would be good if it works.
Well, I think the solution will be instead of having these environmental health standards, I think there'll be a digital or some kind of remote system which bypasses the need to have all this physical infrastructure. So, Richard, you make a good point that we've got this infrastructure, but I don't think that infrastructure will still be there in 2 years. I think people will start to tear it down or use it for other purposes if they can. And people are not going to sit around and waste big chunks of land with buildings, some of them government-owned, of course, the inland facilities. So I think they're going to be torn down or at least modified where possible. But until we know what the actual solution is, we probably can't do anything.
OK. And just finally, Richard, before we go, there is also a report out this week showing that actually, on a relative basis, there's no significant decline in UK exports to the EU relative to the rest of the world.
Well, I think it's our nearest and dearest, really, isn't it? We're always going to trade with Europe, and we're always going to require things to come in from Europe as well. Remember, we're an import-driven economy, Richard. So exports is very important, of course, but we do import more than we export, and the EU is a good source of those. Now, new free trade deals, of course, will broaden our appeal, and I'm not suggesting we won't want to get more things from further afield, but you cannot escape proximity and cost and.
That's right. I think what my point is that actually, as things settle down, bed in, sure there was a short-term decline in the first month, but actually things are getting better and it's levelling out.
Yes, and I think a lot of that is down to a lot of the hard work that industry and government have done to design things like custom systems and get ready for these things. But
fantastic.
There is an increase in cost, Richard. That's all I'd say.
Well, let's try and minimise that. Richard Ballantyne, thank you so much. I've got to go to the break, but that was Richard Ballantyne. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Well, following my Sunday sermon in the first hour, I've got more tweets coming in. One here about the House of Commons. A large part of the problem of the House of Commons is down to the low calibre of MPs. It says, and this is from CMO, who says, they're generally selected by their cronies and their associations without any thought to their real abilities, experience or track record. That clearly is a concern. Well, talking of concerns, I was very troubled to read about a new report that's out about what's going on with radical extremists, terrorists in our prisons, because there's a new report out showing that actually, contrary to the recommends of an earlier report, prison officers and prison governors are not separating out violent, extreme terrorists from other prisoners, and therefore they're potentially poisoning them with their sort of death cult ideology. And I wanted to discuss this further to understand what's going on, and delighted to be joined by Dr. Rakib Hassan, a social policy analyst on this. Rakib, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Richard.
This is really concerning in our prisons, that previous reports by experts for the government are not being listened to and adhered to, in terms of the way that radical, violent, extreme terrorists who've been locked up for decades, they're not being separated, but actually are mixing with other prisoners.
Well, I think it's a very serious problem, Richard. Islamist radicalisation within the prison system. It runs the risk of the spread of extremist beliefs, ultimately exploiting vulnerable inmates who may enter the prison system after being convicted of non-terror related offences, but then becoming hardened fundamentalists as they become radicalised in the prison system and then being released into the wider community. We have 3 separation centres across the prison estate. There's one in Wood Hill in Milton Keynes, HMP Frankland in Durham, and Full Sutton near York. So I'm glad to see that the government is trying to take action to better facilitate the use of these separation centres, so dangerous radicalisers within the prison system can be removed from the mainstream
So they've created the separation centres, but the question is, and this report really infers, that actually we're not being protected and other prisoners are not being protected because there's a sort of a concern that the bureaucracy to use them, and it says here, senior officials are too timid or too incompetent in order to actually put these extremists in these separation units.
Well, I think I'd make the point, Richard, that we have an overburdened and understaffed prison system. But some of the findings, we're talking about prison emirs who are essentially in control of entire prison wings, undermining the authority of prison imams, police officers essentially pleading with these de facto leaders to maintain order. So what you can see is it sounds like a breakdown of state sovereignty within our prison system. On top of that, the UK being a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights, you have Article 8, which is the right to private and family life, and then Article 11, which is freedom of assembly and association. You have convicted terrorists essentially using those human rights provisions to
I just
prevent
find
their relocation.
I just find it utterly incomprehensible, and I'm quite sure the vast majority of listeners and viewers will find it incomprehensible that violent extremists and murderers have the very cheek to think that they still have human rights in the same way that the rest of us law-abiding citizens do. I mean, with rights come responsibilities, folks.
Absolutely.
And if you breach those responsibilities, then guess what? You're going to lose some of your human rights, surely.
No, absolutely, Richard. I think what we need is a human rights framework. When it comes to situations such as radicalisation in prisons, collective public security is prioritised over the individual rights of those who have been convicted of terror-related offences and enthusiastically spreading their poisonous ideologies across the prison estate.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. Is there... is Dominic Raab, is he strong enough on this issue? Do you think he's going to take up the report and do something?
Well, I think he has to. The findings of the report are remarkably damning. But we're even talking about Sharia-style proceedings taking place within the prison system. So I don't think that the average British taxpayer is going to receive this news very well at all, that there is this fundamental, is this Islamist-induced erosion of state sovereignty within public institutions, including our prison system. So I think it's very important that the Ministry of Justice really grabs the bull by the horns and ultimately creates a situation where we can remove dangerous extremists into separation centres so that they are prevented from spreading their poisonous ideologies, especially when it comes to vulnerable inmates.
Indeed. What troubles me is, this report's come, I think it's 6 years after the previous report, and yes, OK, they've created these separation units, but if the governors are too timid or too afraid to use them, then in a sense, as you say, we're going to end up with sort of situations where you end up with Sharia law in certain wings of certain prisons.
Well, it's absolutely remarkable. According to the latest review, you even have radical ideologues dictating the dietary and washing habits of non-Muslim inmates, which is quite remarkable.
Rakib, I just think it's wholly unacceptable, and we've got to keep talking about it and making people aware about it to get change. That's Dr. Rakib Hassan with his concerns about what's going on with violent extremists in our prisons. Thank you very much, Rakib. Now, just before we go to the news at the bottom of the hour, we are going to take a call from Oxfordshire, where James is waiting. Morning, James.
Good morning.
Morning. What's on your mind this morning?
On my mind about the economy and people's wages and everything at the minute. Agency has gone ripen. I mean, in my day back in the 70s, agency was for sick, lame, lazy, busy periods a company would have in the year. They would have agency in. But companies now are just employing agency.
They're using agency workers as opposed to employees. And why do you think that is, James?
It's because it's easier for them. They pay an agency, for argument's sake, £20 an hour. The worker gets £10 an hour, so you've got a third man. So that's the reason why everyone's on such low wages. And these are big companies, not just little companies. And then when they're not busy, they can just go, don't need you tomorrow, we'll get you a ring when we need you to come in, because you're not on no contract.
And therefore, so those workers, very often they're on 0 hours contracts with the agency, aren't they?
Well, yeah. You're on, you can go here a couple of days' work. You go to somewhere where is I won't mention the actual company, but a big company around here. And if they run out of parts or whatever for doing their job, right, we're shut them for 3 weeks. And that's it, you're out for 3 weeks.
I think you're right, James. And one of the reasons, of course, is that actually there are so many additional employer regulations and restrictions on employees that it's just easier to use agency workers.
Yeah, but the thing is as well, the downside of that for the employer as well is an agency. I'm going to work there for a day. You go there, you do a day's work, but you're not employed by them. You're not motivated by the company because you don't know if you're going to be there 2 minutes later. So they're not going to get the best out of a person working or the company. It's a really good point, actually, James. If you're not employed by the company, you haven't got the same level of incentivisation and motivation. I get that, James. Thank you so much indeed for that call from Oxfordshire. Just before we go to the news, interesting observation here from Pete, who says, halve the number of MPs and double the salary. The aim being to attract better candidates. What do you think about that? Interesting idea. Anyway, keep those tweets and calls coming in. We're going to be, after the break, talking about Rishi Sunak's anti-fraud department. You're listening to Tice Talk, the home of common sense, of course, Talk TV.
If my friends had to describe me, I don't know, maybe you should ask them. But I think, or I hope they would say, I am the life and the soul of the party. I'll arrive, things get going, things get done. I'm a doer. They'd say that. They'd also say I'm glass half full. I look for the positive things in people's lives, in what's going on. But also, I think they'd say I'm passionate. I'm passionate about what I do, what I support, what I believe in.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for radical change in Westminster after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations. It comes just a day after Tory MP Neil Parish announced his resignation after being seen watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told Times Radio the case was not representative of all in Parliament.
There are some bad apples, as I've said before. There are people who don't act appropriately, who do not act professionally. But the idea that we can tarnish a whole institution with that brush, I think is wrong. It's just as, in some parts of our society, there are people who held racist views, but that doesn't mean that the entire country is racist.
Well, the Business Secretary has also said this morning that Boris Johnson will remain as leader despite any local election results. Voters will head to the polls on Thursday, but Kwasi Kwarteng gave the PM his full backing and said he was safe in his job. Russia's defence ministry claims 46 civilians have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, the final section of the port city still controlled by Ukrainian troops. They're the first group to leave since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the industrial area be sealed off last week. Well, US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today and said the US will continue to support Ukraine. A 38-year-old man has been charged with murder of 66-year-old Timothy Dundon, whose body was found in Neath, near Swansea, on Wednesday. Emmett Morrison has been remanded in custody and is due in court tomorrow. And the makers of long-running soap Neighbours have confirmed two famous faces are returning for the show's finale. Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan will reprise their roles as Scott and Charlene. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. We are well into the second hour of my 3-hour show, Tice Talk, and we've been looking at all sorts of issues this morning. Ukraine, we've been looking at the standards or lack of standards of MPs, lots of tweets and calls coming in about that, and we've been looking at healthcare. But we also need to look at what's coming up. When I've been campaigning, I keep hearing concerns about the government and councils wasting our cash. It's all taxpayers' money, of course. And, during the COVID crisis, we had Rishi Sunak giving furlough to people, which was the right thing to do at the time. You might argue it was a bit generous. And then you had all the bounce-back loans. But, of course, the issue was that inevitably some people were going to commit fraud, and they were going to take what became very easy money from the government, from furlough and some of these bounce-back loans. And so Sunak announced a big £100 million anti-fraud unit, a great sort of splurge announcement, great headlines, and you'll think, great, they're going to get onto that. But my concern was really pricked by when Lord Agnew, he resigned from the government in the House of Lords because he was concerned that actually the Treasury and this department wasn't taking fraud recovery seriously enough regarding furlough and loans, and that despite the allocation of £100 million, that actually there wasn't enough focus on it, and there's a real question mark about the quality of the staff that is making up this department. Now, the tax experts Andersons, they did some work into this, and so I'm delighted now to be joined by Andrew Park, who's a tax partner at Andersons, who looks specifically into this department, the staff, and whether or not actually they were going to do a great job or otherwise. Andrew, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining me on Talk TV. And so you put in a Freedom of Information request, I think, is that right? To understand what's going on with these staff, how many there are, and would they be up to the job?
Yes, and just to be clear about what we're talking about here, the Chancellor made an announcement in March of last year that he was going to allocate an extra 100 million to HM Revenue and Customs to crack down on various sorts of corona support fraud that had been perpetrated, with funds that had been handed out by the revenue through the tax system. So we're talking here about things like furlough fraud, the support for self-employed people, Eat Out to Help Out. The bounce-back loans are something different again, because they were administered through the banks, and that there are different parts of government as well as the banks themselves trying to chase those down.
Sure. Okay. So this is just furlough. This isn't about this department isn't looking at the bounce back loans.
No, I mean, from what I gather in press reports last week, no pun intended, but the Chancellor seems to have been bounced into announcing another task force for the loans, another 25 million.
What?
For
and you discovered concerns about the quality of the people that have been allocated to this anti-fraud department.
Yeah, I mean, what initially attracted my interest was when I read something on a civil service union website about the challenges that HM Revenue and Customs was having in putting together a task force to do what the Chancellor had asked for. And, you know, one of the things I read was that they were discussing moving a whole team of 13 from their fraud investigation service, organised crime unit across. So at that point, I thought, well, there are several questions here, including what's going to happen to the teams that they've got to cannibalise to staff the task force. And but when you look at the structure of the task force itself, they have actually, to be fair to them, they've done what the Chancellor asked in terms of putting together a task force of about 1,200 odd people, but they've done it entirely with existing HMRC resource. And when you look at the way it's structured, there are very few either fraud investigation service people who've been moved in, or more experienced senior inspectors generally. It's mainly a low-grade clerical team.
So essentially what they've done, it's sort of just sounds like moving, just moving chairs within the same office building. Effectively.
And to a certain degree, not even that, because they're largely working from home. So
don't get me started on that. But therefore, if you're just reallocating the same people, I don't understand how you're actually spending another 100 million on it. All you're doing is just shifting seats.
They say that they're spending the 100 million backfilling the teams that they're robbing of staff in order to put the task force together. But of course, you can't just replace, to the extent that they're damned if they do and damned if they don't, because to the extent that they're moving the right sort of people across, these people take years to train. You can't just create.
Yeah, I mean, but the truth is, Andrew, we haven't got years. I mean, if I was in charge of it, I'd actually be bringing in some smart people from companies like yourselves and others from the private sector, to come in on a secondment and to bear down on this stuff.
Well, exactly. And there's not one external hire into the task force.
Out of 1,280 people, not one person from the private sector?
Not one.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, that just makes my head... that makes me weep. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, this makes me absolutely fume. The fraud took place in the first place. But we need to get this money back. And that what you've just said, I think, reaffirms why Lord Agnew resigned. Yeah,
and when you actually look at the stats for what the task force did in the first year, it's actually sent more than 5 times as many nudge letters, if you like, to people than opened inquiries. So it's opened about 13,000 basic inquiries, and not even actual old-school civil investigation of fraud inquiries, just basic aspect-type inquiries into returns.
And the reason why this is so important is because actually we're talking about, I mean, I think the furlough was about 70 billion, give or take the odd billion amongst friends. We're talking about tens of billions of pounds potentially fraudulently claimed. That's not to mention the backmailers. If this money was recovered, then actually some of the tax increases that we're all having to pay, some of the environmental levies and all the other bills that is contributing to the cost of living crisis could actually be eased if these people did a decent job and got some of this money back.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the revenue, they're decent people trying to do a decent job, but I think they're chronically under-resourced, and that's the main issue. I think there's been a problem for a number of years in a lack of old-school investigative inspectors.
And I mean, here's another stat I read. There are some, in terms of some of the bounce-back loans, there were 7,000 companies registered in just 5 addresses in 6 months between December 20 and June 2021 that made almost $500 million of furlough claims.
Yeah. I mean, arguably there was a lack of basic checks. I mean, the flip side of that is I think the revenue did a fantastic job in getting money out to people to keep them afloat.
Yes, they did. There's no doubt about that.
But in hindsight, again, maybe if the private sector had been involved at the outset and designed the right controls, you know, I think a lot of this could have been avoided.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and for your good work in highlighting this, because it's absolutely vital. I have to say, this drives me mad. These fraudsters, I would catch them, I would lock them up, and I would throw the key away for a very, very, very long time. I think it's absolutely outrageous, and I think other taxpayers do too. Anyway, give us a call, 0344 499 1000 with your views. You're listening to Tice Talk here at Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. We are cruising through the second hour of my 3-hour show, and there's lots of tweets and calls and messages coming in. This is an interesting tweet. Quite enjoying Richard on Talk TV. Only quite. I've clearly got a lot of work to do in order to turn quite into really enjoying it. Another tweet coming in from Testament, who says, MP's behaviour, doesn't it show how serious Johnson and Partygate is? The man running the country denies and denies again, breaking the rules, and then once fined, won't resign. That goes back to this issue of integrity that I was saying earlier. How many fines still to come? Testament says, add Patterson's support, rot from the top. Look, none of us want this to be so dramatic, so drastic, so catastrophic in terms of trust. But that, I think, is the reality of what's going on. Anyway, let's go to a couple of calls now, and we have got, first up, Stuart is here in London. Morning, Stuart.
Good morning. Nice to speak to you, Richard.
And to you, what's on your mind? Thank you.
Well, I've just read this morning that apparently illegal immigrants are taking our government to court for threatening to deport them to Rwanda. I mean, taking them to court, it must cost thousands. Where are they getting the money from?
It's a really good question, Stuart, and I'm going to be talking about it in the third hour, whether or not you read the same piece that I did. Now, of course, the obvious answer is, and I think it's a fair assumption, that they're getting the money from the legal aid body, and, you know, that's where the human rights lawyers, they get paid from.
Well, how can an illegal immigrant claim legal aid? I mean, the Home Secretary of the day, whoever it is, the law must be changed. They give a deportation order. That's it. There's no appeals. You're out. Finished. Well, the judge gives it the same, but it must be countersigned by the Home Secretary. This is just getting ridiculous. This is costing us millions, keeping criminals in. Another one in the paper today couldn't deport him because he had a tattoo of a Christ or something, a cross put on his arm. Very simple. Take him to a tattoo laser removal, take it off, and then deport him.
The danger is, of course, Stuart, that you're talking about something which is just good old-fashioned common sense, but I think that's impossible for people at the Home Office.
If you ever become leader, would you do that? Change the law, and that's it. Gone.
My view is, Stuart, that frankly, if you can afford to pay these vile people smugglers 3, 4, 5 grand to come over the English Channel, then actually, if you want a lawyer when you get here, you can afford one. And I think that probably will stop a lot of the nonsense.
Well, I mean, listen, Richard, you know and I know. But men from Ukraine are fighting a war. They get their women and children safe. This lot coming over, all young men, and they should be in there. If there's a war in their country, they should be there fighting. They're not genuine asylum seekers, refugees. They're just here to live on benefits in this country. And goodness knows what else. I don't know what other reason they're here for. It's just frightening thinking about it.
You know, it is really concerning. And I'm afraid to say, Stuart, that you mentioned the word thousands. This isn't costing thousands in legal fees, going to court and such like. It's costing tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of millions, in terms of the additional cost, because there are now closer to 100,000, I think, people waiting to go through the asylum process, and that overall is costing billions, and almost no one is being deported.
Well, what I'd like to see is the government come out with, I'd like to know that apparently there's about 9 million foreign-born people live in England. Maybe they've had 2 kids each. That could be up to 20 million with their children. I mean, how many have worked? How many have never worked? How many have always lived on benefits? I'd like to know the figures.
Well, I think the reality is that actually a smart, lawful immigration system, and let's remember, over the decades, we've been, wonderfully welcoming to people who want to come and contribute. But I think we want a lawful system that works for our economy, works for our needs. What we don't want is paying huge sums for illegal immigration. Stuart, thank you very much for that call there. We're going to head up from London back to Manchester. Manchester's busy this morning, where Jackie is waiting. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, good morning. Just to give a bit of balance on the NHS, I worked in it for 23 years, first as a nurse for many years, and then worked my way up to become a senior manager, whereby I managed services at 4 different general hospitals. So I managed the consultants, the doctors, the ward, everything. Nursing was the easier job. There's no doubt about that. But what has happened is that you've got managers in post now that have come from selling cars, going into the health service, that are out of the depth. You've also got categories of managers that do not need to be there. Yes, we need more doctors and nurses, but we also need to take it away from politicians, because every time another party gets in, they spend an exorbitant amount of money and change all the system again. And I think we need to go back to basics. I think we need to decentralise it because you can't manage something as big as this.
That's right. I think the NHS, Jackie, is the second or third biggest employer in the world. In the world. It's certainly the biggest employer in the UK. And, you know, you worked in the NHS for decades. Thank you so much for that. But I think what worries me is, we talked about it earlier, we're spending about the average per head for sort of Western comparable nations. But if you look at the number of doctors per 100,000 of population, nurses, the number of beds per 100,000, we're right at the bottom of the tables, which means, as you've identified, we're spending far too much on other things apart from the front line. I think we may have lost Jackie. I thought she was still there. Jackie, thank you so much for your call. That was Jackie in Manchester. We're going to head now. I think I've got Heather. Good morning, Heather.
Yes. Good morning. Good May Day to you. But I wanted to tell you that when I was in London, I worked for Bank of Nova Scotia in the debt collection department, and we would write proper letters, obviously mainly to Canada, and we would file them in, you know, old-fashioned paper files. Now, if today people had been, like, trying to defraud and claim furlough, and that anomaly would have shown up almost immediately. We would have seen, you know, that something wasn't right.
Seen the likelihood that something wasn't right.
Yes, it would have shown up straight away. Whereas today, you put data and information on a computer, it's sort of like almost lost and anonymous. You know, it just.
I think what happened, in fairness to the government, and actually all credit to HMRC, you know, when they announced the furlough scheme, that was the right thing to do, and it was really well executed and implemented in terms of the administration. But what they didn't make clear at the time for both the furlough scheme and the bounce-back loans was that the government is doing the right bit, putting its arm around employees and also small businesses. But if anybody was to basically take the mickey and to rip off taxpayers during this emergency, then woe betide them, that actually the government would come down on them like a ton of bricks after the crisis.
Yes, well, you know, I mean, these sort of things just get lost in the sort of haze of everything. You know, there's no proper sort of grip and control anymore at any time. And if we don't go back to paper systems where we can see and record, you know, I think it would help enormously in certain areas.
No, it's an interesting point. I mean, you know, we live in a digital world, and computers sort of, they do essentially sort of slightly rule our lives. But actually, it shouldn't be that difficult with good people to identify the sort of the warning signs. And actually, of course, you can use the computers, Heather, to identify the warning signs and say, well, hang on, you know, you've just started this company, you've taken a load of money.
To do it. You know, it just, I don't know, things seem out of control in every direction, every sphere and walk of life now, and it's terrible. It's not a good feeling.
It's not a good feeling.
I wish I could come up there and, you know, I'll work.
I'm sensing
for nothing. Give me something to do. You just pay my expenses and I'll do it.
I'm sensing, Heather. Yeah, I'm sensing you'd want to sort of come up and shake a few people and say, get a grip, get on with it, do a proper job.
Well, I could go down to Newport from here to work in the passport office, but it's not open.
I'm afraid the problem is, Heather, you'll have to go to individual homes because no one's in the office. That's part of the problem.
Yes, I mean,
dear. Reverend, thank you so much for that. We're going to go to Peterborough, which is the home of the passport office. Carl, good morning.
Hello there, Richard.
Hi there, hi there. Don't tell me you work for the passport office and you're doing a marvellous job.
No, I've just got I just had my passport not so long ago, and they delivered it perfectly on time, and I've got my
excellent. How many weeks can you remember, Carl, did it take?
Didn't take that long, about 5 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's, in a sense, and I've heard that actually, it's working for some, but there's still huge backlogs for millions of others.
Yeah, I had no problem whatsoever with it. Not so well.
Well, lucky you. Maybe they saw your Peterborough address and took pity on you. What else is on your mind, Carl?
Can I speak about, you had some lady on earlier on talking about the channel?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I have a real thing. I thought they should have just turned them back to France. Just turned them back to France and said to Macron, "You're having them back," and that just put them on a boat, not tow them back. But I've got a thing about non-EU immigration as well. Now, Sir Edward Lee stood in the House of Commons not so long ago, and he was saying that he stood to Boris Johnson. He faced Boris Johnson up, and he said that people didn't vote in the referendum to swap EU immigration for non-EU immigration, and they've been bringing in people from Syria, from Afghanistan, and then it's been Hong Kong, 97,000, and then Ukraine, and now it's going to be visas for Indians, for Indian people.
Yeah, I think what I would say, Carl, just before we finish, is there is a difference between humanitarian aid for people that we've actually got obligations to, such as, British citizens living in Hong Kong, Ukrainian refugees. There's a massive difference between that and those coming across the channel.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. But I think basically that, number one, charity begins at home. Number two, we haven't got the services, the resources to keep having people come into the country.
That's the key. I've got to go to the top of the hour. Carl, thank you so much for your call. That's Carl from Peterborough. Stay with us. We've got lots coming up. It's Tice Talk here on Talk TV.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 12.
Good afternoon, I'm Nadira Tudor. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle says radical change in Westminster after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations. It comes just a day after Tory MP Neil Parish announced his resignation after being seen watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told Times Radio the case was not representative of all in Parliament.
There are some bad apples, as I've said before. There are people who don't act appropriately, who do not act professionally. But the idea that we can tarnish a whole institution with that brush, I think is wrong. It's just as, you know, in some parts of our society, there are people who hold racist views, but that doesn't mean that the entire country is racist.
Well, the Business Secretary has also said this morning that Boris Johnson will remain as leader despite any local election results. Voters will head to the polls on Thursday, but Kwasi Kwarteng gave the PM his full backing and said he would lead the party into the next election. Russia's defense ministry claims 46 civilians have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, the final part of the port city still controlled by Ukrainian troops. Well, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today and said the U.S. will continue to support Ukraine.
We believe that we are visiting you to say thank you for your fight for freedom, that we are on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
A 38-year-old man has been charged with the murder of 66-year-old Timothy Dundon, whose body was found in Neath near Swansea on Wednesday. Emmett Morrison has been remanded in custody and is due in court tomorrow. And the makers of long-running soap Neighbours have confirmed two famous faces are returning for the show's finale. Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan will reprise their roles as Scott and Charlene. Show bosses said they were the ultimate Neighbours couple, and a finale wouldn't feel right without them. Those are your latest news headlines. Still to come, your TalkSport update, but first your weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
It will be a wet afternoon for much of England and Wales, and rain continues to spread southeastwards. Further north, it will be drier with some sunshine, but also a few showers. Starting off across Scotland this evening, and there'll still be a few showers around, but it's a markedly drier picture than this time yesterday, and with some late sunshine too. In Northern Ireland, most of the rain from earlier will have cleared, meaning it will be a drier and brighter end to the day. It will be mostly dry by this evening across northern England, with the earlier rain having cleared southwards. For Wales, the Midlands and eastern England, you can see it will still be quite damp with plenty of cloud and some lingering rain. The heaviest and more persistent rain will be across southern parts, though. This rain will gradually clear southwards overnight, leaving a mostly cloudy night with some fog patches.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
Irish boxer Katie Taylor has beaten Amanda Serrano in the biggest ever fight in women's boxing history. Taylor retained her lightweight world titles to become the undisputed lightweight champion with a split decision points win at Madison Square Gardens in New York. It was the first time two women had headlined the world-famous venue. The biggest match in Scottish football, the Old Firm derby, has just kicked off at Celtic Park. Celtic are 6 points clear at the top of the Scottish Premiership, and a win today against their bitter rivals Rangers would all but secure the title for the green and white side of Glasgow. Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola has described yesterday's 4-0 victory against Leeds as a really good result. Liverpool had gone back to the top of the Premier League with their win at Newcastle, but City's win saw them head back to the summit. Just 1 point separates the two sides with 4 games to play.
We create a lot of chances to, and knowing the circumstances that we have. So in Champions League away against, it was a really good result.
That's all for now. I'll be back with more in half an hour.
The Sunday Night Club is your club. I'll take you inside the dressing room, from the terraces to the boardroom, to ask the questions you want answered. There is no membership required for the Sunday Night Club from 7.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and good afternoon. We have flown into the third hour of the show, and the calls and the tweets are pouring in. We've got one here comes in from Jill. So, the government can find money to pay for legal fees for illegal immigrants, but cannot find money to help pensioners pay for gas and electricity bills who've paid their tax for 40 years. That is a common theme. I've had 3 or 4 different tweets with a very similar theme to that. And I think that's a really good point. You know, the waste of our taxpayers' cash is just legendary, legion, at all levels. And yet we've got the highest taxes for 70 years. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, now, obviously, Ukraine, in a sense, whilst it's not on the front page of many of the newspapers, because it's been going on for so long now, some 60 days, and I fear that we're into a long war of attrition. But the reality is that actually, on the ground, there is a huge amount going on. Not only are we sending weapons and military equipment, quite rightly, but also huge amounts of humanitarian aid is being sent into Ukraine, where it is, of course, so badly needed. And that's why I'm delighted to be joined here, live in the studio, by Alistair Chambers, who I spoke to a few weeks ago. When he was in Ukraine, he had been taking some provisions and donations generously given by people here in the UK. Alistair, a very good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to the studio. Sort of, you're in between trips, I gather. Tell us a little bit about your experience in your first trip, and now you're about to go out again.
Oh, it's been phenomenal. The whole experience has been out of this world, and just helping people and seeing the difference in the way the British public had come together and helping people that they don't know, they've never met, has been outstanding. Only the other day we had an elderly lady that you're talking about heating bills. She came up to me and she handed me 2 bags, and she looked at me. She walked in. She struggled carrying these bags. I think she carried them quite a long way.
Yeah.
And she said that, "I'm so sorry it's taken this long. I've just had my pension in." So how good that the British public's fantastic.
Absolutely remarkable. And you know, you've been out there and you've taken numerous lorry loads of donations and equipment. Tell us about your next trip.
So we've taken over 30 vehicles, 44-ton lorries combined through a city of Gloucester, and I think that's more than the whole of Scotland put together. We're one of the smallest cities in the country, so it's phenomenal. We've had the support from the county council, local councillors, and the British public. So our next trip out, we're taking some more cash vehicles. When I say cash vehicles, these are vehicles that used to be used for taking cash and gold bullion around the UK. And because everyone's going to contactless, these vehicles are in abundance. And there's a company up north, Preston, Fleet Services, they've donated some vehicles. We've driven them over, loaded them up with medical supplies, body armour, helmets, vital frontline medical equipment, and deliver this out into the heart of Ukraine to help support people. It's been a remarkable.
And, I mean, that is remarkable. Obviously, you yourselves, I mean, it must be pretty scary going into what is essentially a war zone. And obviously the majority of the war's in the east, but of course, even in the west, around Lviv and Kyiv, you know, there are missiles coming over at various times.
Yeah, it has been quite frightening at times. We've got a really supportive family and network back home in Gloucester. And the first time we were in Lviv, there was 30 missile strikes from Russia, a base very close to us. It was like 3 clicks away, 3 kilometres. So it is a real war, very close to the border. And Lviv, you're only looking at 60 kilometres from the Polish border. So Russian attacks, Russian offensive is really close to our European borders. It's quite frightening.
And what are the real shortages now in Ukraine that you're hearing about and trying to sort of help satisfy?
So we hear about all this money from Biden, from the UK. And the reality is we've driven over, I've seen people on pillboxes, general people like you and I, taking up a stand against Russia in trainers and T-shirts, in pillboxes with one weapon between 2 or 3 people. It's actually... We need some more help. The government needs to be making sure that the money's going to the right people. We're having orders from generals, colonels. I'm having orders from Territorial Army for equipment that they haven't got. even down to boots. So we need to make sure that the MODs really get this equipment over to the right people in the right places really quickly. And we met with Lord Dan Hannan from the House of Lords the first week of this crisis, and he said what we've done with getting humanitarian aid out to the front line on the border and into Ukraine is much quicker than any government organisation can do. So it's working really well what we're doing, and we just need to make sure it continues.
Absolutely remarkable. And whilst you're taking humanitarian aid into Ukraine, what's the continuing flow of refugees now leaving Ukraine into Poland and Hungary?
So the first few weeks, it was literally like a scene from The Walking Dead. There's people that have been walking miles, traffic jams going back to 28 plus hours, families and children walking over with just a bag, even their dogs in that under their arms, and it's been frightening. But that refugee flow is still there. Some borders much worse than others. And what was really scary is I've got friends on my Facebook that are questioning if it is really true. And I had to live stream, say, look, this is the reality. There's a lot of people here don't believe the Russian state propaganda, because this is real. This is real life. It's happening.
And, I mean, you know, we hear about this Russian propaganda, and that's why actually we're hearing that in Russia, Putin is still pretty popular because of all of that, what we know is misinformation. But going back to Ukraine itself, I mean, if this is and I fear it is, a long war of attrition, where Putin can't win on the ground, and therefore, essentially, he's just going to sort of continue to effectively sort of try and bomb it into submission. The implications for humanitarian aid and supplies could actually, I mean, this is not weeks, this is months, potentially years.
You're absolutely correct, Richard, absolutely correct. What we're doing is we're putting humanitarian aid in certain locations, so when the war moves into different areas of Ukraine, there's going to be supplies in cities, in storage areas ready for the resistance to keep arms up against Russia. But it is a frightening war. I think Putin's, I'm really, really worried he's going to go to a dirty bomb. I'm really worried about that.
I think we all are, of course, and that's why, you know, it's, in a sense, it's, I guess it's because it's been going on for some 60 days now, it's sort of inevitable that it, you know, life does go on for all of us. You know, in the Mail on Sunday, for example, Ukraine wasn't mentioned until page 20. But the reality is, the potential implications, we know that what's gone on has driven the increase in energy prices and food prices, and that's going to continue. I think there's a misunderstanding about the medium-term impact this is having on all of us. None of us knew, for example, that Ukraine provided 80% of sunflower oil. Just the knock-on consequences, and if this goes on for many, many months, those consequences grow.
I think collectively we need to understand there is going to be an implication, as there has been with fuel, sunflower oil, bread, etc. And I think collectively we need to ride that storm. And if we ride that storm, that in itself is an act against Putin. We're coming together, and we need to be strong. Okay, it's hard times at the moment, energy bills soaring, but we are a great country. I'm half English, I'm half Spanish, but I'm so proud of my English roots. I love our country. I think we're full of great people, and this situation, this terrible situation Ukraine's brought together communities in England stronger than I've ever seen them before. It's truly remarkable. We're doing these sort of shoebox appeals at the moment. We're dropping them off the orphanage, and they're basically shoeboxes with sort of small items in. And to hand them over from people from the UK to the children is such a beautiful moment. It's honestly, it's really beautiful.
And you know, we like to sort of look at things from all angles here. And just whilst we've been talking, Alistair, we've had a tweet in here from someone who says, now, and this is sort of the other side of the debate, so you're talking but providing tools to continue the war. So how do you answer that observation from, I think it's Yvonne?
Yeah. Thanks, Yvonne. I like question, and questions are great, but I think you sort of misunderstood. What we're doing is we're not providing equipment, lethal equipment. We're providing equipment to sustain life. Helmets to stop people getting shot in the head. They're getting shot at anyway by Russia. We're just making sure they're not going to get killed. Body armour to protect their vital organs. And also these helmets and body armour are primarily going to aid workers getting food in. What you remember is there's a lot of people...
That's a critical point.
Really critical, really critical.
This is to help people who are trying to help other people.
It's to sustain life. So it's a great point, and maybe I haven't clarified that correctly. So just to completely be matter of fact... The vehicles we're sending in is to get supplies into the Ukraine for food, for people that are too scared to go for the Russian humanitarian corridors, because it's been proven time and time again, as soon as you go for these corridors, you're going to get shot and killed or taken away to a gulag in the middle of Russia. So let's get the people out, let's get them to Europe where they're safe, let's make sure they've got food, the people that are staying in there, that are too scared to leave, and let's make sure the people that are doing these fantastic journeys have the safest means of transport, and that's what we're trying to do. So, great question, Yvonne.
No, I mean, and thank you, Yvonne, for that, because, you know, for us just sort of sitting here, it is really hard to understand it. You know, mercifully, none of us have ever had to experience anything like this in our lifetimes, and it's such a horrific shock that we're now faced with all of this. So you're going back later this week?
Yeah, we're leaving Wednesday. We're filling up the lorry with loads of food, medical supplies. We're taking that straight over Wednesday, so really looking forward to helping people.
Fantastic. And you'll be there for a week or so?
Yeah, myself and Mark, he's ex-military, so it gives me a bit of reassurance being with somebody that knows that he's been to Bosnia, Serbia, and we've got supportive families, so...
Alistair, fantastic work that you're doing. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming in and sharing it with me, my listeners, viewers, answering those questions, which is really important so that we've got a greater understanding. That's Alistair Chambers, humanitarian aid volunteer, who's going back to Ukraine with more equipment, more supplies, and more items in order to sustain life, to help people with equipment, with general supplies, clothing, as I say, to keep people alive and to sustain life. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. After the break, we will, of course, be taking your calls, your views and your tweets. One just come in here, going back to the point about the loans. I took a bounce-back loan because it didn't... hang on, let's try that again. I took a bounce loan. It didn't help as the business was ruined by lockdowns, but I'm still paying it. There were checks and balances for loan applications, and the banks didn't do the due diligence because they had the safety net of the British bank supporting them. Maybe that's part of the reason why there's been so much wastage. Anyway, give us a call with your views, your experiences. You know the number. You are, of course, listening to the home of common sense. It's Tice Talk this afternoon here on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. We are well into the third hour this afternoon. I can't believe how time has flown. There's just so much to discuss. Lots of tweets and messages coming in. That was an amazing chat with Alistair Chambers, the humanitarian worker. He's going back to Ukraine, and he answered an interesting question from Yvonne, who has also tweeted back, "Thanks, Yvonne, keep safe." And that absolutely is, of course, right, but we'll keep in touch with Alistair. Meanwhile, we've got a tweet in here from Sir Mac, who says, all MP employees to be made employees of Parliament. Secondly, when an MP is being investigated, he or she should be removed from Parliament. If innocent, they return. Should they be guilty, then there's an automatic by-election. If the MP is popular, they can be re-elected. Interesting thoughts. I mean, obviously, the point is you're innocent until proven guilty, but equally, when you have been found guilty, at the moment, there's no mechanism to remove you for certain types of behaviour. And I feel that's wrong, and I think many of you do too. But anyway, we've got some calls. We've got, down in Dorset, we've got Derek. Good afternoon, Derek.
Hello, Richard. Good programme again.
Thank you. How are you?
Well, getting wound up. I've got several points. I'll try and do it quickly.
Release your frustrations to me and the audience, and you'll feel better, okay. Derek.
We had the best prison service in the world. They done away with chief officers. It was the regimental sergeant major. I was a chief officer before I went to the governor's side. I worked my way up through the ranks. Union rep. So you knew the job, and you were the man that set the standards. And you put on a serious look all day long, and you saw that the prison worked well. They done away with that and introduced graduates from university that many of them used to hide in their offices when there was trouble, and then they only stood it about 4 months. Then they become expert criminologists in universities.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, that's no use to man nor beast, is it, Derek?
No, but that's what actually happened. And from having the best prison service in the world, they done away with the main one. Respected by the prisoners, respected by the staff. Now, could I move on to pensioners? Where is age concern? Why aren't age concerned speaking up? I can afford barely the
cost of living increase, yeah.
I'm concerned about the little old ladies on their own that no one's speaking up for them. They're a forgotten group, and age concern, get out there, you're paid, and speak up for these poor pensioners who are suffering alone.
Derek, that's an interesting question, and if there's anybody who might work for one of the charities, such as Age Concern, or knows someone else who works for them, do get in touch, because, we'd like to hear. I'm sure they are working hard, but what you're sensing, Derek, is that not enough's being done, I think, at all levels, particularly at the government level.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, Richard, basically, we live in a changing world. When the Queen goes, I think you'll find royalty will be called into question. The Commonwealth will break up. She's done a superb job. And also, when people say we're the mother of democracy, how can we be the mother of democracy when we have an unelected House of Lords?
Well, Derek,
regional representation. There should be 50 specialists, ex-judges and military appointed, and it should be done on proportional representation. It's no good us saying we're the mother of democracy. We are not. And the selection procedures, as someone said earlier, Old Boys Network, selecting. We need a radical change.
We do need change. You're absolutely right, Derek. And I like to use the expression we should be the mother of all democracies, but at the moment we're not. And certainly I'm like you, Derek. I'm in favour of abolishing the House of Lords, replacing it with something else, where there is some elections, there is some time limits to people's duration, their term of office, and yes, you could draw in experts and from regions and things. What we've got at the moment, I think, is the worst of all worlds. It's cronyism. It relies on sort of donations and favours and the old boy network, and it's just not good enough. And I think that we should look around the world and see who's doing it better. And indeed, on that, I think we've got, talk about being around the world, we've got a caller from Vietnam. Alan, good afternoon. It's probably good evening with you.
Good afternoon, Richard.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's 6:30 in the evening here.
Yeah, you probably got your first glass of wine out, Alan.
Well, I'm just cooking some supper, right enough. Richard, I've been a long-term supporter of you on various things and whatever. But
thank you very much.
I've got to call into question your statement that you made earlier on that Britain was supplying arms to Ukraine, and quite rightly so. Well, I don't think it's quite rightly so. Britain is up to its eyes in debt. You've got servicemen living off the streets.
We may have lost you there, Alan. Are you still there?
Hello?
Hi there, Alan. Yeah, we got to the point where you said we've got ex-servicemen living on the street, and then we just lost you.
Yeah, and then we're up to our eyes in debt. Pensioners can't afford to pay their bills, and here's us giving away free all these arms to the Ukraine. For what?
Alan, look, it's a really good question, to which my answer is that actually we can afford both. The issue is we're wasting so much money here in the UK at all levels of government.
Yeah.
You know, you may see it less if you're living in Vietnam. I don't know if you're living there or just sort of travelling, but there's just waste everywhere. And
I know, Richard, earlier on in the programme you were on about the people stealing the money from the whatever it was.
The furlough scheme, that's right.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I don't agree, and I know a lot of people don't agree that we're giving all these arms to keep the Ukrainians fighting the Russians. It's got nothing to do with us.
Well, I'm going to respectfully appreciate your point, but I disagree. I think that you know, we have got a duty to help the Ukrainians. They've been invaded by Russia, and essentially this is like a proxy war. And, you know, we are faced with some very, very serious consequences. But, Alan, I really appreciate the point. I think that actually it's not from an affordability point of view, we absolutely can afford it. Yes, you can debate whether we should or shouldn't. But if we didn't, it's quite clear that Ukraine would have really struggled, their brave soldiers, and Russia probably would have taken over by now. And then what consequences? Where do they go next, Alan? You know, if you don't stand up to a bully in the playground, then that bully will continue to essentially abuse everybody else. And I just feel that that's wrong. And it's interesting, isn't it, Alan, that Putin hasn't gone into countries in the Baltic states that became NATO members. And I think there's a reason for that, that actually he wasn't afraid of Ukraine, but he is afraid of the defensive alliance, NATO, and that's why he hasn't gone into those countries. And I think that actually tells a story. But I appreciate the call and the point. We're international. People are listening all over the world. We've just got lots of tweets still coming in, and one from Jill here. How about I claim legal aid to fight the government in providing basic heating and electricity for my home? Very good point there. Another tweet came in from Chloe. The lady who spoke about NHS managers, my experience is the same. I nursed for 30 years. There we are. Stay with us. We've got the news now. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk TV.
If my friends had to describe me, I don't know, maybe you should ask them. But I think, or I hope they would say, I am the life and the soul of the party. I'll arrive, things get going, things get done. I'm a doer. They'd say that. They'd also say I'm glass half full. I look for the positive things in people's lives, in what's going on. But also, I think they'd say I'm passionate. I'm passionate about what I do, what I support, what I believe in.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Nadira Tudor. The Business Secretary says closing Parliament's bars amid sexual misconduct allegations would be a huge overreaction. It comes just a day after Tory MP Neil Parish announced his resignation after being seen watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. And Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle says radical change is needed at Westminster. But Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told Times Radio the case was not representative of all in Parliament.
There are some bad apples, as I've said before. There are people who don't act appropriately, who do not act professionally. But the idea that we can tarnish a whole institution with that brush, I think is wrong. It's just as, you know, in some parts of our society there are people who hold racist views, but that doesn't mean that the entire country is racist.
Well, the Business Secretary has also said this morning that Boris Johnson will remain as leader despite any local election results. Voters will head to the polls on Thursday, but Kwasi Kwarteng gave the PM his full backing and said he would lead the party into the next election. Russia's defence ministry claims 46 civilians have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, the final part of the port city still controlled by Ukrainian troops. While US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today and said the US will continue to support Ukraine. A 38-year-old man has been charged with murder of 66-year-old Timothy Dundon, whose body was found in Neath near Swansea on Wednesday. Emmett Morrison has been remanded in custody and is due in court tomorrow. May Day rallies are taking place across Europe today to honour workers and protest against the government as citizens and trade unions take to the streets. In Paris, the holiday was being used to rally against newly re-elected President Emmanuel Macron. There are protests also set to take place in Istanbul, Athens and Nicosia in Cyprus. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. We're into the last half hour of my show. I don't know where time has gone. It's literally flown by. Lots of calls, tweets and fantastic guests. Thank you very much. And there we go. The tweet come in here from the Thought Police who says you can't please everybody. Well, that's certainly the case for sure. And inevitably, with regard to the recent Rwanda migrant policy, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary knew that they certainly wouldn't please everyone. And sure enough, report in the Times at the back end of this week just gone, that the first two legal cases have now been started by two asylum seekers who entered the UK illegally in the back of lorries this year, and they are suing the government because they fear that they might be removed, and they've instructed lawyers to trigger a legal challenge. Well, first of all, who's paying the legal fees? I think we can probably guess that. I'm almost certain it's legal aid, but perhaps the law firm who's been instructed, Instalaw. If I'm wrong, if they're doing it for free, pro bono, maybe they can tell us. Give us a call. They know the number. Or I might get them on the show next week. My wonderful team and Aaron, we might try and organise that. And sure enough, so they're now suing the government, saying that it's against various rules. They're trying to use the same case against Julia Miller. They're saying it's not right because it hasn't yet been debated in Parliament. Well, hang on. We've had the Nationality and Borders Bill that's just gone through Parliament after months of debate, so I don't think that washes. Their other line of argument is that, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, they want to test the policy's compliance with our data protection laws. Yes, those wonderful things. To see how it's compliant with sharing personal data with Rwanda and whether it concurs with GDPR rules. Seriously? I mean, this is costing us billions of pounds every single year, and these people are worried about poxy GDPR rules? I don't think millions of British taxpayers who are suffering, paying exorbitant amounts of taxes, care two hoots about GDPR rules. But maybe I've got that wrong. Send us a tweet, give us a call. Meanwhile, I'm delighted to be joined by Alp Mehmet, who is, of course, well known to everybody. He's the chairman of Migration Watch UK. Alp, a very good afternoon to you. So, this was inevitable.
And to you, good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon. Maybe your first appearance on our new TV channel. Do you like the new colours, the new studio?
Love it. Congratulations. I have been on a couple of times, and I think it's wonderful.
Well, thank you for coming on again.
More grease to your elbow.
So, these legal challenges, we knew they would come. it was inevitable. And where do you see this going, Alp? It feels to me that there's going to be a long haul.
It's going to be a very long haul, and I'm afraid it was something to be expected, and that's going to happen whether we like it or not. To a certain extent, it all depends how much political will, how much resilience the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have, because they're going to be lambasted as they already have been. So I think that it's going to be a long haul, but it's what happens at the end of it that I think we should be looking at. One thing that seems to have been forgotten is why these new rules, this new legislation has been introduced. And can I remind people that having reached nearly 30,000 illegal crossings in boats last year, we're now heading for 3 or 4 times that already. That's why these tough rules, and they are tough if implemented properly, have to be introduced. If we're serious about stopping it, then I see no alternative, especially as the French don't seem to want to play ball.
And so, yes, this was expected. And I think, in fairness, I think actually Priti Patel does want to sort this out. I'm sort of less convinced about the Prime Minister's resolve, but then I'm not really convinced about his resolve about anything, frankly. But, you know, the government does have to be robust and has got to take on these legal cases. My concern is that Priti Patel is being undermined by the very people in her own department, the Home Office, most of whom seem to be working from home. She's already been undermined by her one of her most senior officials, Matthew Rycroft, on this Rwanda issue and other issues. I would rather she set up a whole different department that deals with this. Maybe you should recommend that. You should head it up yourself, Al.
Not me, Richard. I'm a bit past that sort of thing. It would have been something I'd love to have done 10 years ago, but no longer. There are lots of very good, young, able people who I think could be brought on to do that job. But look, you quite rightly criticise the Prime Minister and Whitehall generally, including the civil servants, for really putting every stumbling block in the way of this policy. It's not only them, though. It's the whole of the Twitterati, the whole of the church even. Can I read this to you, if I may, Richard? I think it's relevant. Absolutely outrageous to condemn people who have concerns about one of the greatest movements of people in human history as racists. That, sir, was His Grace the Archbishop of Canterbury speaking in 2016. All of a sudden, he has changed his mind, and I think quite unkindly, really, for an Archbishop of Canterbury to have said what he has. This is all about stopping people from coming to this country illegally and jeopardising, risking their lives in the process. That's what it's about.
It is, of course, and you know, we've got to stop it. We've tried negotiating with the French, and for a variety of reasons that hasn't worked. I respect the Home Secretary for trying this, but if you're going to try something, you've got to follow it up with real diligence, a real robust team of people that absolutely believe in it. I fear that the Home Office officials don't, and therein lies the biggest challenge. Final thought, Al.
Well, to be fair, the union behind this primarily, the PCS, they have always been against, for all manner of reasons, but they have been against strong, firm immigration rules. They were against this sort of thing when I was an immigration officer nearly 50 years ago. So that's only to be expected. What the government has to do, though, is follow through with their legislative intentions and do something about it. They've introduced a law now. Rwanda is part of the answer. It's not the total answer by any means.
Of course.
And I think that the government really needs to stick to its guns.
Out Mehmet, thank you so much. That's Out Mehmet, chairman of Migration Watch. And indeed, we do know that after the last week of no crossings, that the crossings have restarted. So those people who thought that it was an immediate deterrent, there's a lot more work to do. But it's part of the answer. It's not the whole answer. Lots of nice tweets coming in here. Gabby says, Poxy rules, oh, you're a breath of fresh air, Richard, speaking for the silent majority. These pen pushers on their big salaries, trying everything to stop the government succeeding. Thank you very much for that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We'll be taking more calls, more tweets, all the way up to 1 o'clock, when, of course, Trisha Goddard will be taking over from Connecticut. Stay with us, it's Tice Talk on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. We're in the last 15, 16 minutes of the show, but there's still so much to discuss. And, of course, sport, big news, Chelsea. Goodness me. Chelsea do seem to have a buyer in the form of a Todd Boehly, I think I've pronounced that right, consortium, who's the preferred bidder to buy Chelsea. But at the last minute, and this was extraordinary, at the last minute, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, owner of the chemicals business Ineos, that also sponsor the Mercedes F1 team, They came in with a £4.25 billion, I think £1 billion offer. Delighted to be joined in the studio by Kwaku Afari, TalkSport guru on matters, and a Chelsea supporter. Goodness me. Kwaku, do you think this bid will go ahead from the Bowley Consortium, or there might be some complications? What's your sense?
Well, we thought this process would have been resolved maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's been, like Nadine Dorries correctly said, Chelsea on borrowed time. There's a deadline of May the 31st for this to be resolved. I do feel like now that Bowley's been established as the preferred bidder, this should take a couple of weeks now to resolve. But the bid from Sir Jim Ratcliffe that came in last minute was something that took everybody by surprise. I was in work when it came through, and obviously we're very familiar with Jim Ratcliffe in terms of Ineos and their involvement with Mercedes. They acquired the 33% of Mercedes Formula 1 team, so he's already involved in British sports. As a Chelsea fan, I'd prefer him, but it looks like Todd Bowley's going to be the preferred bidder.
Why do you think Ratcliffe came in so late? I mean, he's had plenty of notice.
I know, that kind of just outlines and indicates how much of a mess this process has been. Obviously, the sanctions came in and they were very hastily implemented on Roman Abramovich, and as a result of that, he's not been involved in the process. And I feel like when there's a deal this big with a club the size of Chelsea involved, the person who owns the club has to be involved in selling the club to make sure it goes to the right bidder. But now it seems like the mediators of this deal have preferred Todd Bowley, and I think the deal will go through in the next couple of weeks.
Because most of the consortiums that were bidding were American-dominated consortiums, and Jim Ratcliffe, obviously, British guy, not too clear what consortium he's got. But the sort of suggestions that maybe there was sort of a preference towards the American-led consortium.
It's indicative of like how sports was going in the UK. If you look at Liverpool, the team you support, FSG are the owners of Liverpool. If you look at Manchester United, the Glazers. If you look at Arsenal, Stan Kroenke. So a lot of these top English teams are owned by American owners, American business people, and it seems like that's the way that it's going. As a Chelsea fan, like I said, I would prefer to see Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He seems to have more of an investment, more of an emotional investment, as opposed to it just being a business deal. Obviously, he's a billionaire, he's a businessman, but I would have preferred to see somebody like that come in and own Chelsea. But it seems like that's just the way that British sports are going at the moment.
But Kwaku, your sense is that this Bowley Consortium will go through?
It will go through. It's now, like I said, Nadine Dorries has said to Chelsea on borrowed time, this is a deal that needs to go through by the 31st of May. And my guess is within the next couple of weeks, within the next fortnight, it should have gone through.
It should have. Well, in a fortnight's time, of course, your team and my team will meet each other in the FA Cup final. We may even see you there, because you're going, and I'm trying to get tickets. Who knows? Fantastic. Kwaku Afari, thank you so much for those thoughts about what may or may not happen with the new ownership of Chelsea Football Club. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts on that or anything else that we have been talking about today. We've got a call here from Angus in East Yorkshire. Good afternoon, Angus.
Good afternoon, Richard. Nice to be talking to you.
And to you. Thank you very much. What's on your mind?
Well, it's a very good show today. There have been a number of things, but actually, just your previous guest on from Migration Watch, I think there's a couple of interesting things to do with this whole Rwanda deal. And the first thing is, in terms of the detail of this deal, I understand, by the way, which nobody seems to be talking about, Richard, and perhaps it needs a little bit of scrutiny, but in this deal with Rwanda, we're agreeing to take an awful lot of migrants from Rwanda, which nobody seems to be talking about. Are you aware of that? Because
I heard a reference to it, but as you say, there's been very little clarification on that. I mean, to be honest, there's very little clarification on the deal whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I think this is something that is of great concern as to what the devil is in the detail in all deals, Richard. And I think that is definitely there, and it certainly bears scrutiny. And also the other thing that I think we seem to be missing as well is this darn European Convention on Human Rights that everybody keeps bringing up. Isn't it about time that Brexit really meant Brexit, and we pulled out of this European Convention? Because as you've been saying about all these lawyers, these coming into play on legal aid paid for by the British taxpayer or whoever, that we're adhering to. One of the difficulties we have in terms of sending people back is the European Convention on Human Rights. Isn't it time for us to revoke that?
To be honest, Angus, you're absolutely spot on. There are major legal complications with being still attached to the European Convention on Human Rights. I do think that we're going to have to leave it. which I think is important to clarify that, because whilst we've been on, Suzanne has sent a tweet. She's clearly unimpressed with me. Suzanne says, when did Richard Tice become such a wet blanket? Well, I have to tell you, Suzanne, I don't think I am a wet blanket. I think I'm fairly clear and robust on this. I think we are going to have to leave the ECHR, and we're going to have to essentially reassess our position on the Geneva Convention on Refugees from 1951, I think it is, which is clearly outdated from where we are. And we're going to have to change our own Human Rights Act. So all of these things, real change is going to be required. I think Angus may have gone. Are you still there, Angus? No, we've lost Angus. He clearly didn't like what Suzanne said. Well, anyway, Suzanne, thanks for your thoughts. Maybe get in touch as to what element of wet or blanket you think I am. But there we are. John in Newcastle, good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi, John.
Yes,
what would you like to say?
My point is this. I'm 77 and I've realised over many years the Conservative Party, Labour Party and Liberal Party are a waste. And I do believe in the upper house, the House of Lords, being finished with, because it's unelectable. Nobody can vote for it. It's just the fact that we need other parties in the Houses of Parliament. It's so easy for, it's so easy that these people in the Houses of Parliament just sit there week in, week out, year in, year out. It's just pathetic. We need opposition in the Houses of Parliament, and we need the upper house to be demolished as such. That's my point of view.
No, I think, actually, John, it's a really good point of view, and certainly that's where I'm coming from, that the House of Lords should be abolished, but it should be replaced with something else. Would you like to see a second elected chamber, or do you think, actually, John, that one chamber's enough?
No, possibly a second elected chamber, but nothing like over 600. If you look at the Liberal Democrats, they have 13 members of Parliament in the Commons, and yet they'll probably have well over 113 in the undemocratic House of Lords.
Oh, it's madness, isn't it?
It's pathetic, but I blame the British people. The British people will not march for a better situation. For instance, if you look at France, they finish the travail, they finish work at 62 years old, men and women. But our people have to work until they're 66. And this government, I think, has in theory maybe 68 in the future for them people. The British people need to march.
Well,
just something like the French.
And you made an interesting point, John, about the issue of other parties coming to the House of Commons. Of course, there are many of us trying. It's not easy in reality, because first past the post makes that harder. That's why we're in favour of proportional representation. John, thank you so much for those thoughts. Keep listening, keep calling. That's John from Newcastle, where we're going to head now down to Basingstoke, where I think I've got Simon. Good afternoon, Simon.
Good afternoon, Richard. I think the last few weeks has demonstrated how the fact that we don't have any grown-ups in politics anymore. There are a couple of major issues that really concern me. One is food, because of the war in Ukraine and the impact and the effect of an embargo on Russia is going to have. And the second is money. If you look at the markets, you can see that negative interest rates, which have existed for EU bonds, is changing. Interest rates are going up all over Europe and all over the world in terms of the cost of government borrowing, and our governments are arguing about who's looking at whose legs. It's ridiculous. We have some major issues that we need to face as a country, especially a country that imports more than 50% of its food.
There's no question we have major issues across a range of issues. If we're importing more than 50%, I thought it was near about 40%. But anyway, in the 1980s we were producing about 80% of what we consume. I thought that figure was around now 55 to 60%. But on this this point about debt, Simon, just to sort of challenge you on that. I mean, for 30 years between the two world wars, we as a country, we had national debt that was at least 50% higher than current levels, and that was an emergency period. would you be happy seeing a bit more debt, or are you worried by the current debt levels?
I'm worried about the current debt levels, but what I'm more concerned about is the fact that because the central banks have lowered interest rates, they've artificially lowered the cost of debt.
Yes, that's true.
And, there used to be a phrase, bond vigilantes, and they have re-emerged. I mean, the US debt, the 10-year debt, has more than doubled in the last 6 months.
Simon, Simon, I've got to get to one more caller before the end of the show, but you're quite right. There are concerns and there are challenges, and that's why we've got to keep talking about them. Simon from Basingstoke, thank you so much. We will pick that subject up. David is in Leicester. Before I finish, just 45 seconds, David. What would you like to say? Good afternoon.
Right, quick to my point then. To do a recall petition, you need 10% of the electorate within the constituency to sign a petition.
Yes.
You have no access to the electoral roll, or at least not the electronic copy, so you don't know whether people are on the electoral roll.
No, but it has happened successfully before. It's not easy, but it has happened.
Yeah, it has happened, yeah.